Sweet. All right, I'm good to go. Rock and roll. All right. Hi, class. So we're going to be discussing my research project thus far. I've titled it United in Violence, the Trump-Era Rise of Far-Right Extremism, because I feel like that title adequately conveys what I seek to uncover. With that being said, my research question is as follows. What is driving the proliferation of far-right extremist groups in the Trump era? I define the Trump era as the period following his initial announcement of his candidacy in 2015 into the modern day. While this period is the central focus of my research, I feel that there are a few preliminary things that I must discuss prior to proceeding with the remainder of my presentation. First, I feel like it's imperative for me to discuss what constitutes right-wing extremism and why it matters. Then I'll briefly discuss the period that preceded President Trump's initial decision to run for office in order to situate the current proliferation of far-right extremists and the far-right extremist groups in their proper context. So, what is far-right extremism and why should we care? Broadly speaking, right-wing extremism can be divided into two categories: anti-government and white supremacists. White supremacists are largely focused on the preservation of the Aryan race, and they espouse narratives about segregation, genocide, and xenophobia. Anti-government extremists are largely in opposition of government enlargement, and they revere terrorists like Timothy McVeigh for carrying out his devastating bombing of the OKC Federal Building. Right-wing extremism is extremism that is nationalistic in orientation. As you'll recall from our readings, nationalism is intrinsically tied to the state and national identity. As such, right-wing extremists tend to frame themselves as both patriots and true citizens. This emphasis on the true versus false dichotomy is a recurring theme in right-wing extremist rhetoric, which ties into another component of their ideology: racism. Right-wing extremists tend to orient themselves around the white race as true Americans and frame all other demographics as members of an outgroup that is incompatible with American ideals. They are proponents of individual liberties, chief among them being the right to own guns. They are conspiratorial by nature, and as such, they perceive existential threats to the nation everywhere. This makes them inherently paranoid and adversarial to foreigners who they perceive as threatening the American way of life. They also perceive globalization as a subversive force that seeks to strip America of its sovereignty. Finally, they believe in the necessity of preparation. They believe America is being assailed and that it is their duty to prepare a defensive force in the form of paramilitaries. All of these components taken together make right-wing extremists especially dangerous. So why should we care? Well, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, right-wing extremism has accounted for nearly all of the domestic terror incidents that have occurred in the United States since 1994. And even if we look to the recent past, we'll see that this trend is constant. Attacks by right-wing extremists account for roughly 66% of all domestic terrorist incidents in 2019 and over 90% in the first half of 2020. Furthermore, if we wanted to get granular and just look at specific incidents, we could examine a multitude of right-wing attacks just over the past 10 years and see the overall spectrum of mobilizing issues that drive right-wing extremist violence. In 2015, there was the Planned Parenthood shooting, which points to abortion opposition as a mobilizing issue. That same year, Dylann Roof carried out the heinous Charleston church shooting, which highlights the role of racism as a mobilizing issue. 2017 saw the Unite to Right rally transpire right here in our home state, at which the Great Replacement theory was a mobilizing ideal, pointing to the role of conspiracy in right-wing extremism. 2018 and 2019 saw both the Tree of Life synagogue shooting and the El Paso Walmart shooting occur, again highlighting the role of racism, while also shining a light on immigration opposition as an inciting issue. And finally, 2021 saw the infamous January 6th insurrection, driven by narratives of a deep state conspiracy to thwart the will of the people and steal the election, again highlighting the role of conspiracy and nationalism as inciting issues for right-wing extremists. So how did we get here? Before there was President Trump, there was Barack Obama. Obama came into office at an incredibly tumultuous time. America was 8 years removed from 9/11 and facing an economic crisis. At this time, our counterterrorism strategy was externally focused, centered around international actors, and largely ignoring domestic terrorism. Furthermore, in an effort to repair our devastated economy, President Obama heavily relied on executive orders and partisan legislation that, while not intentional, alienated vast segments of our population and sowed division in an already fragile nation. Obama, being America's first black president, was destined to occupy a contentious spot in American history, regardless of his policy preferences. However, at the time of his election, no one anticipated just how divisive his presidency would become. In the course of my research, I encountered two theories. One is called the power threat perspective, and another is called the political threat hypothesis. These two theories work in tandem to illustrate the way in which President Obama's presidency served as the inciting catalyst for the proliferation of far-right extremist groups here in America. The power threat perspective alleges that dominant groups in society will mobilize their resources to maintain power in the face of threats posed by minority groups in society. The political threat hypothesis predicts that minority groups will experience backlash in response to their political gains. This backlash is often violent and conducted by the dominant group of society as a means to reestablish their preferred social order and hierarchy. It's evident that Obama, as the first Black president, upset the status quo here in America. He served as a symbol of Black enfranchisement and as an emblem of the waning white hegemony. During his second term, tensions between white America and minorities became even more pronounced following the murder of Trayvon Martin. At this time, President Obama vocalized his opinion on the murder, actively began rallying around social justice movements, signed executive orders such as deferred action for childhood arrivals, and rebuked our criminal justice system for being rife with racial disparities. This incensed white Americans who felt that their way of life was being threatened in favor of a president who was advancing a minority-centric agenda. If President Obama was the candidate of upsetting the racial status quo, candidate Trump was the candidate of entrenching it. From the onset of his campaign, President Trump turned convention on his head. Unlike his predecessor, candidate Trump had very little interest in addressing minority issues. In fact, as far as he was concerned, minorities were the issue. Trump's campaign aligns with another theory I've encountered in the course of my research. This is a theory called the emboldenment hypothesis. The emboldenment hypothesis alleges that increases in the frequency of targeted violence may be promulgated by high-profile government officials who, through words or actions, embolden members of the dominant group to violently offend against minority groups. During the course of his campaign, Trump repeatedly demonized and dehumanized Muslims, Latin immigrants, and he even incorrectly parroted harmful stereotypes about Black people. In fact, his entire campaign was built off of a nationalist slogan of "Make America Great Again," which harkens back to a mythic past that is long gone and conjures images of a nation that has lost its way and is under siege from outside forces, namely immigrants and terrorists. Furthermore, he frequently alluded to a corrupt governmental establishment that he colloquially dubbed the swamp, and alleged that if he was elected, he would drain the swamp and rid Washington of the elites. For the first time in our modern political era, we had a presidential candidate who was openly espousing white nationalist rhetoric. And while in the past this would have been detrimental for a candidate to do, for Trump, in our hyper-polarized environment, fresh off the heels of America's first Black president, it propelled him to the presidency. During his first term, President Trump wasted no time in implementing his nationalist agenda. A mere 7 days from his inauguration, he signed Executive Order 13769 titled "Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States." This executive order prohibited citizens of Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen from entering the United States, purportedly to protect the country from terrorists. Despite its alleged intentions, this executive order resonated with white nationalists and garnered praise from prominent figures within the far right, such as Richard Spencer and former Grand Wizard of the KKK, David Duke. This wouldn't be the last time President Trump and his administration signaled their allegiance to the tenets of white nationalism either. One of the pillars of President Trump's first administration was a zero-tolerance policy with regards to immigration. Throughout his campaign, he had alleged that the United States was facing an invasion by an infestation of immigrants. He made several promises while on the campaign trail to conduct mass deportations and end catch and release. And when he assumed office, he intended to make good on that promise. 5 days after taking office, on January 25, 2017, he signed Executive Order 13767 titled Border Security and Immigration Enforcement and Executive Order 13768 titled Enhancing Public Safety in the Interior of the United States. Order 13767 authorized the construction of a border wall, and 13768 authorized a massive expansion of immigration enforcement. Under Order 13768, immigration agents were allowed to deputize local law enforcement officers through the 287G statute and essentially delegate immigration enforcement duties to local cops to expedite immigration arrests. That same order also saw the removal of prosecutorial discretion, which allowed for prosecutors to indiscriminately pursue removal proceedings against all migrants, not just those with criminal records. The following year, at the guidance of his senior policy advisor, Stephen Miller, President Trump's administration enacted its most contentious policy yet, the policy of family separation. The way they enacted this policy was legally dubious. They bypassed the 1997 Flores settlement, which stipulated that immigrant children must be released from detention centers within 20 days by reclassifying the children of migrants as unaccompanied minors and charging the parents with illegally crossing the border in order to render the parents unavailable to care for their children and frame the separations as a necessary result of criminal prosecution. By transforming illegal crossings from a civil issue into a criminal issue, the Trump administration was given the impetus they needed to carry out family separations and expedite the implementation of their zero tolerance policies. Trump was determined to make America white again, and his base was paying attention. One primary source that I've encountered in the course of my research is stormfront.org. Stormfront is one of the oldest white nationalist forums in existence, and it has been a treasure trove for gauging white nationalist sentiment. Regarding Executive Order 13768 and 769, as well as the zero tolerance policies, stormfront.org was incredibly helpful to me for gauging for getting insight into far-right community sentiment regarding these policies. Under their news links and articles forum, I found a thread titled "DHS and DOJ release illegal alien crime statistics for the first quarter of 2018." This thread was created by a user named Race Realist, whose initial post linked DHS reports and subsequent posts alleged that the presence of migrants in America is destabilizing the economy. He also engages in a dialogue with a user named 14 Words of Truth. This user's name is a reference to the white supremacist slogan, "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children." And true to his handle, this user frames the presence of immigrants in America as an existential threat when talking with Race Realists. He boldly claims that we don't need a single immigrant invader in America, and what we must do is deport millions and encourage millions more to go back to where they belong. It should be noted that Mr. 14 Words, his avatar is a Make America Great Again hat, which signals his alignment with President Trump, as well as his support for his agenda. Elsewhere in the news links and articles forum, I found forums discussing the zero tolerance policy titled "Leftists Stage a Nationwide Temper Tantrum with Protests in More Than 700 Cities to Oppose President Trump's Zero Tolerance Policy," and "Recording of Crying Children at U.S. Border Adds to Outrage," with respondents prompting Stormfront members to close your hearts to pity and asking questions such as, how many white American children are crying because their father lost his life to an illegal? This sort of anti-immigrant and whataboutist rhetoric is not uncommon amongst Trump-era far-right groups. In fact, I would go as far as to say it's a hallmark of these groups. Groups such as the Patriot Front and the Proud Boys are true advents of the Trump era. Patriot Front was founded in 2017 by Thomas Rousseau and posits themselves as being true Americans, which they allege requires that one be a descendant of European colonists. They frame the so-called threat facing America as both existentialist and apocalyptic. They claim that America stands on the precipice of destruction as a result of cultural erasure and rampant immigration in a corrupt state. They allege that America can only be saved by the creation of a white ethno-state, and they see themselves as tasked with rebuilding America to preserve white hegemony and eliminate representative democracy. They align themselves with President Trump due to his anti-immigration agenda and his adversarial nature. The Proud Boys were founded in 2016 by Gavin McInnes. They claim to be Western chauvinists who champion Western culture above all others. They oppose Muslims, non-Europeans, immigrants, as well as feminists, people of color, and LGBTQIA+ people. They are notoriously violent, with the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project alleging that 20% of the time they appear at a protest or counter-protest, events turn violent. And while this number may sound minuscule, it's vastly higher than any of their contemporaries and points to their propensity for violence as one of their defining characteristics. They gained notoriety following 2017's Unite the Right rally, which was organized by their former members and led to the death of Heather Heyer. They, like the Patriot Front, align themselves with President Trump due to his anti-immigration rhetoric as well as his pro-white legislative agenda. Most notably, they were even given direct orders by President Trump during the 2020 debates when he told them to stand back and stand by, implying a direct linkage between the administration and the organization. Other iterations of far-right groups, such as the Oath Keepers, frame themselves as being protectors of the Constitution, yet they also engage in right-wing mobilization. Most notably, they were present at the January 6th insurrection, alleging that they were defending the Republic from the deep state, who intended to disenfranchise the people by stealing the election. The most common burger frameworks I've encountered in relation to far-right extremists thus far has been the promotion of in-group, out-group identities. The various right-wing extremist groups seem to have one commonality. They tend to orient themselves around the white race, and they tend to oppose minorities and immigrants as perceived threats to their way of life. They almost always construct a crisis solution narrative of white people being disadvantaged, either economically through higher taxes to fund resources for migrants, or opportunistically through DEI programs, or even purely from a population standpoint via fertility differences between whites and various minority groups. They frame their outgroups, immigrants and minorities, as posing existentialist threats and causing the erosion of their way of life. And they perpetuate conspiracies of a deep state enabling these outgroups, sowing intentional divisions as part of their plan to subvert American sovereignty at the behest of foreign nations. Finally, they spew apocalyptic narratives that if they do not act to preserve America, the nation will fall. Taken together, these frameworks make it hard not to see just how dire the threat of far-right extremism is. They are not only adamant that they are facing extinction, they are emboldened by a president who seems to perpetuate the same claims that they espouse. This gives them legitimacy and makes them feel empowered. Hence why I've chosen to pursue this topic in my research, as I feel far-right extremism poses a grave threat to the security of our nation. Thank you.